I didn't really want to spend this whole episode, the Thursday episode of the Morning Pit, talking about basketball again. We did that yesterday, and it wasn't particularly pleasant talking after the SMU game. We did that Tuesday, and it was only moderately more pleasant because the SMU game hadn't happened. And we did that Monday, which was, again, not pleasant because it was sort of reflecting on the North Carolina game. And so I didn't really want to spend all of today talking about basketball, but I didn't really have any one, big topic that came to mind for today that I really wanted to, hammer on. I really want to talk about this. I didn't have any of that. So as you've probably seen in the headline, this is 22 short thoughts about Pitt sports. And in classic 22 short somethings fashion, we have 19 because that's what you do. When you call something 22 short somethings about something else, you only do 19. That's the way to do it. And so we have 22 short thoughts about Pitt sports, which is actually 19 short thoughts about Pitt sports. I've written them all down. Some of them are about basketball. Some of them are about football. Some of them are about other things. And I don't know how long they're going to take. I don't think I'm going to take a minute for each one of these because they're short thoughts, but I'm also spending a little time on the intro. We're actually going to play the intro music today as opposed to yesterday when we just skipped over it altogether. I really should, I can't say I shouldn't because it's what's topical and what's, timely and what we should do. But, doing taping the Morning Pit after a 9 p.m. tip-off that ends with a 20-point blowout, I just don't know. I don't know if I was putting my best foot forward for that one yesterday, but I appreciate everybody who checked it out. I'm not sure why the audio version of the podcast would only upload 5 minutes. It didn't really make sense. Every time I tried to download the audio from the YouTube video, it only downloaded a 5-minute clip. I'm not really sure what that's all about. I apologize for those who only listen on the audio side that you didn't get yesterday's diatribe about the SMU game. I highly recommend you check it out here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you can get up to date on what we were thinking after that game on Tuesday night. But here we are. It's Thursday. It's almost the end of the week. 22 short thoughts about Pitt sports right here on the Morning Pit. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, Thursday edition of the Morning Pit here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know what we always ask you to do? Like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. And, or in the case of yesterday, you won't miss our Pitt content overall. If you only listen to the audio podcast, sometimes we have issues, technical issues with getting the audio uploaded. So maybe it might not come through or might not come through in a timely fashion. These videos are always here, though. So if you want to catch up on the Panther-Lair podcast, the Morning Pit, whatever it is it might be, it's always right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and that way you won't miss any of it. And then, of course, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, for all the Pitt sports news you can possibly handle. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, where Pitt fans are talking about Pitt sports all the time. Even when it's bad, they're still talking about it. And the message boards have certainly been active in the last few days, few weeks, few months, few years, few decades. Panther-Lair.com has been around a long time, and the message boards are going strong as part of it. All right, 22 short thoughts about Pitt sports. And like I say, I didn't want to spend all of this episode talking about basketball, but some of these thoughts are about basketball. Number one, Brandon Cummings, without Damian Dunn, averaging 18 minutes per game, 11 points per game. He has had 5 double-digit scoring games in those 8 games, and it's not just a matter of getting more volume and more playing time because Dunn is out. He's actually good. And a good scorer, and a good shooter, and he showed that on Tuesday night at SMU. He may not be great on defense, but who is? So you might as well go with the offensive guy. Thought number 2, Zach Austin. In the first 17 games of this season, when Pitt had a 12-5 record, he was shooting 44.8% from 3. 17 games, 44.8% from 3. In the last 7 games, when Pitt has a 2-5 record, Zach Austin is shooting sub 30% from 3. 29.8%. The Clemson game, the Syracuse game, the first Carolina game, the Wake Forest game, the Virginia game, the second Carolina game, and SMU. And in most of those, he has been very bad. Sub 30% in those 7 games. Number 3, Jorge Diaz-Graham. First 17 games of the season, 61.5% from 3. The last 7 games, 30% from 3. Hey, that's a big drop, just like Zach Austin. Maybe he's not a better option. Oh, yeah? Point number 4, Zach Austin in the last 7 games has attempted 45 3-pointers and made 14. Jorge Diaz-Graham has attempted 10. Give me the volume for Jorge, and I bet his percentage will be above 30. Just my guess. Point number 5, Guillermo Diaz-Graham in the last 7 games, since we're talking about everybody shooting 3-pointers in the last 7 games, 11 of 22. Seems good. Seems very good. Seems like he should keep shooting. If you're not going to play defense very well, you better be able to score. And you might be that team that just goes out and outscores teams, and you don't defend, but you win with offense and you win with points. Now, maybe this team is not built that way. Maybe this team is not good enough to score like that, but they could at least try. And the way to try is by getting the ball to your shooters and your scorers and the guys who can put up points, which brings us to number 6. And shout out to 13-9 on the message boards. Basically had this same concept, but I narrowed it down just a little bit. In the SMU game, Guillermo Diaz-Graham, Jorge Diaz-Graham, Amsal Delilich, and Brandon Cummings, arguably Pitt's 4 best 3-point shooters. I think from a pure shooting perspective, you would say those 4 guys, the Diaz-Graham twins, Amsal Delilich, and Brandon Cummings, combined to play 68 minutes and shot 5 of 14 from 3, which is about 35.7%. Now, 13-9 said the other 8 guys, or the other 5 guys who played. I would narrow it down to the other 3 guys who would be 3-point shooting threats. Jalen Lowe, Ishmael Leggett, Zach Austin, combined to play 104 minutes in that game on Tuesday night and shot 4 of 21 from 3, which is 19%. So, Guillermo, Jorge, Amsal, Biba, Cummings, 68 minutes played, as opposed to 104 minutes played for the other guys. More importantly, 5 of 14 from 3 for the twins, Amsal and Brandon Cummings. 5 of 14, 36%, compared to low-legged Austin going 4 of 21, 19%. Who should be shooting? Cam Corrin, number 7. I'm bouncing around. I see that I did this a little bit out of order, but it's okay. Number 7, Cam Corrin has had 6 or fewer rebounds in 19 games this season. Pitt has played 24 games. Cam Corrin has had 6 or fewer rebounds 19 times. He has had 2 or fewer offensive rebounds 20 times this season. Pitt has played 24 games. Cam Corrin has had 2 or fewer offensive rebounds 20 times, including 4 games when he had 0 offensive rebounds. Number 8, Jalen Lowe has had 3 or more turnovers in 17 of 24 games this season. And Pitt is 8-9 in those 17 games. Number 9, Ishmael Leggett has attempted 10 or more field goals in 20 out of the 23 games he has played this year. 20 out of the 23 games. He's played 23. Remember, he missed the 1 game with an injury. He has attempted double-digit field goals in 20 games. Pitt is 10-10 when Leggett attempts double-digit field goals. When he has attempted 14 or more field goals, which has happened 7 times this year, Pitt is 2-5. Now, of course, when he has 13 or less, Pitt is 11-5, which not great. Still a lot better than 2-5. Does it? Maybe it means something. Maybe it means nothing. But Corrin rebounding, low turnovers. LOWE turnovers, and Leggett being really inefficient with his shooting all seems to be recurring themes with this team and have a direct contributing factor, or be direct contributing factors to this team's success or lack thereof. You're not going to like this one. Number 10. It's better to spend $10 million or $7 million on a roster than it is to spend $25 million or $30 million on a buyout, a new coach, and a roster. Number 11, football. It all comes down to the offensive line. It always all comes down to the offensive line, but it all comes down to the offensive line for Pitt this year. They've got a lot of pieces in place. They've got what seems like it could be and should be a pretty decent team. They're not strong at every position, of course. There's some question marks some questions that need to be answered, but it really comes down to the offensive line and whether this offensive line has gotten better, whether they have fixed the offensive line. And I'm not entirely sure if they did or not. They certainly put in the effort to do so. But if they fix the offensive line, there's a chance that this team might be okay. Maybe even good. Number 12, Kendall Stanley. Had a chance to talk with him yesterday, the transfer from Charlotte. Full season starter last year at right tackle, coming in presumably to take the right tackle spot at Pitt. Told us he weighs 290 pounds, and I got to be honest, he carries that 290 really well. Dude looks like a tight end. And I think on one hand, you might look at him and be like, man, he's not very big. But when he tells you these 290 pounds, he's carrying that really well. I think that speaks to what kind of shape he's in. Seems like he's got his conditioning order. He said he wants to get bigger. He wants to get up to 300, but he said he's already added 10 pounds since he got to Pitt, or maybe even 15. I forget the number that he said. Probably out of all the offensive linemen that they have brought in this offseason, the 3 transfers, I'm probably the highest on Kendall Stanley and the impact he could potentially make as the starting right tackle for this team this year. Number 13, the goal for the offensive line, and we repeated this many times in the offseason, and we'll keep saying it because it's important, was to add talent in the starting group and add talent in the depth. And I think that's what they were able to do. Even if all 3 of these transfers don't start, they'll be contributing players. They'll be filling out the depth chart, and it'll improve the health of the offensive line across the board. Number 14, they added a lot of speed. Ja'Karian Turner, we talked to him yesterday, a freshman running back coming in. He says he was clocked at a 4.2940 at a camp at Miami. Even if that's not accurate, he was still moving really, really fast. Even if he's not actually a 4.29 guy, he was still moving really, really fast. Whatever the exact number actually is, I don't think there's any question about the speed that Ja'Karian Turner is going to bring to this offense. And I think that's across the board. I think they brought in 6 offensive skill guys, running backs and receivers, and they're all sort of the same kind of guys. Some are a little faster than others, some are a little bigger than others, but they're all generally around the same size, and they've all got a lot of speed. And I think, that's huge. And then, in addition to the transfers they brought in, but I really feel like they rebuilt the skill positions with this 2025 recruiting class, running back and wide receiver in particular, I'm talking about here. And it, if nothing else, they'll be fast. They'll be fast. Number 15, Corey Sanders getting mentioned in connection with the safety's job at Texas. This is not the first time we've seen Corey Sanders tied to other positions. This won't be the last time we see Corey Sanders tied to other positions. I don't know. He might even end up getting the Texas job. He's been reported as a finalist. I think he is involved there. We'll see if he ends up getting the job, getting offered the job. I suspect if he were to get offered, how could you turn down Texas at this point? It's arguably the biggest college football program in America. I think it's one that up until the last year or two wasn't having as much success as it should. But it's a behemoth, and it always has been, and it always will be. And so that's a hard job to turn down. But the reality is, even if this one doesn't work out for Corey Sanders, if he doesn't get this job, eventually the right opportunity will come along and he will go, because he's a really good coach, one of the best coaches on the staff. And he's a guy who I think is headed for a coordinator position, either at Pitt or somewhere else, and eventually a head coaching job. Probably at a MAC school and then working his way up. I think Corey Sanders is just that good. He's not the only good coach on this staff, but he's certainly right there near the top of the list. And I think he's, if you get through this offseason and he's still at Pitt, and who knows, by the time you watch this, maybe Texas has already hired someone. But eventually Sanders is going to go because he's just that good and deserves that kind of opportunity. Number 16, Dan Fisher is going to be fine. Like what he has built with the women's volleyball program at Pitt, that's not going to come crumbling down. And I know there was a lot of disappointment about the fact that they lost in the Final Four again, this past offseason. And we talked about it a little bit when it happened. But again, these are 19 short thoughts about Pitt sports. And that's one that came to mind. Like, what he has built at Pitt, I think is built to last. Now, I mean, the idea of things being built to last and having long-term stability, it's a little bit different now because of, than it was maybe 10 years ago, just because of the transfer portal and how fast fortunes can change for a team and a program. But I feel pretty confident that what Dan Fisher has built can be sustained and will be sustained. It already has been sustained. It will continue to be sustained as the program moves into the future. Number 17, the WPIAL this year in the recruiting class of 2026 sort of feels a lot like previous classes. There's a handful of decent guys, maybe a dozen or so that are going to go to Power 4 conferences, maybe a little bit more. It's more or less in line with what we've seen over previous years. Decent depth in this class. It'll probably, again, be like what Pitt has typically gotten out of the WPIAL in the past 10 years of, probably 2, maybe 3 guys. There'll be a bunch of guys that go to Penn State. There'll be a bunch of guys that go out of state, and Pitt will get 2 or 3 from the WPIAL, which sort of feels like standard operating procedure at this point for Pitt with Western Pennsylvania. Number 18, that's why Jacob Bernowski was in 7 different states during the January contact period. And all these coaches were all over the place. They're in Georgia. They're in Texas. They're in North Carolina. They're in Florida. They're in New Jersey. They're in Ohio. They're in New York. They're all over the place. Maryland, Virginia, D.C., West, traveling all over, because if you are Pitt, you are not relying entirely on the WPIAL. And we know this. We've known this. And we will continue to know this. Even though people get all worked up when WPIAL guys go elsewhere, Pitt can't build the program and the team and the roster from the WPIAL. They've always had to recruit outside of this area, and they'll continue having to recruit outside of this area. So they'll get 2 or 3 WPIAL kids, and the bulk of the roster will come from those other places, in addition to the transfer portal. And number 19 on our 22 short thoughts about Pitt sports, there's always tomorrow. There's always tomorrow, and we know this. And tomorrow could bring another disappointment, or it could bring a success. And I don't know what teams are playing tomorrow. We're speaking more proverbially, but there's always tomorrow. Jeff Capel, after season number 4, everyone wanted him fired, and his buyout saved his job, and he ended up making the NCAA tournament the next year. After mid-season 2020 for the Pitt football team, I think there were a lot of people giving up on Pat Narduzzi, even more than often, tend to give up on a coach. If you think about midseason where this program was after the Notre Dame game, a year and 2 months later, they're raising a trophy in Charlotte. Now, the game has changed. Things are different than they were a few years ago, but my point remains. There's always tomorrow. And it might get better, and it might get worse, and it might stay the same. But the possibility is always there that something good could happen. So you're pretty disappointed about the streak that Pitt basketball has been on. You're pretty disappointed about how Pitt football ended the season with 6 straight losses. But Pitt basketball has 7 more games to play. Pitt football has got a whole nother season coming up, starting in September. There's always tomorrow. There's always another chance for disappointment, but there's always another chance for success. So that's our final thought. That's our 22 short thoughts about Pitt sports, summed up in 19 short thoughts about Pitt sports, because that's the industry standard. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If there was one of those 19 thoughts that was particularly of interest to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments or on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, where Pitt fans talking about Pitt sports all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com to get the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news you can possibly handle. And then, like I said, like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We'll have our mailbag tomorrow, so if you want to go on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and submit a question, we'd love to have it. And we always look forward to doing those. So mailbag tomorrow, and then Pitt Miami on Saturday, because there's always another day coming up. There's always another game. There's always another season. Have a good Thursday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.